Yeah, this was a big weekend for Hunter, and this was a good track at a good time for him. He rides his track very well. It plays into his strengths. It just works for what he does well. He's methodical and pretty technically sound, and this racetrack rewards that. If you try to ride High Point, especially going back several years, but the same trends remain. If you go in there with poor technique and you don't understand the mechanics of how to ride, this track will penalize you. You'll just won't be able to find traction. You're always on kind of on a lean angle, so it's really hard to be aggressive because you can't really ride in the middle of the tire as much as you want, and you kind of have to understand, weighting the outside peg and all these things that are instinctual for riders at that level, but they are really critical for this racetrack. And I just think it works well for Hunter. He just can think through the racetrack, and you can't just blitz your way around it. There's too many ruts, and you'll find yourself upside down too quickly. So, going all the way back to 2022, when he and Jet battled all the way to the end, you could just see this track worked for him, and that trend kind of continues. And I think it was important just on a big picture scale for him to find that form again, reestablish himself amongst Eli and AP and those guys, just because it felt after the first round, we went to round two at Hangtown. He was kind of off the back of those guys. He really didn't have much for them. Last week was a little better, but it just felt like he was slipping a little off the tail end of those guys. Where AP was surging forward, you could really see him taking steps forward. Eli is Eli. We know what he's capable of. And Jet, we already know. For him to kind of reassert himself, he needs to be ahead of Justin Cooper. He needs to be in the fight with or ahead of AP. Like, that's where he wants to be. He wants to be that week in, week out podium guy. It's a really tough ask. And I just thought it was a big step for him mentally going into a break to remember, like, yeah, it's fine. I am one of those guys where a week off, if you have a rough round, like if Hangtown had been this weekend and he was really nowhere near the front, he couldn't see the leaders, kind of got dropped by everybody. Those thoughts can easily get reinforced in a negative way. So I just thought it was a good race for him at a good time. And yeah, he'll be good at Southwick. I don't think it's necessarily great or awful for him. It's kind of middle of the road, but mentally he'll just be in a better place, I think, coming in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Historically, they both showed there that's like their sort of when you talk about going to stadiums, in certain areas for riders, that's their, it seems like a mental advantage going to High Point. But the one thing I will say, just again listening to the press conference, is the setup for Hunter. Yeah, he did well at Parla. He did well there, but then it seemed like a little off at Hangtown, and he was kind of in the mix at Colorado, but it stood out to me that he was very comfortable by his own admission in the press conference with the bike. And there's something to be said for Hunter with that. He went through that very horrible string of injuries, and he's a very, like you said, JT, he's a very calculated rider, measured. He doesn't ride. You barely ever see him ride outside his comfort zone and put himself in bad positions any longer than any further than when he used to, sort of when he had those injury ravaged years. So I think there's a lot to be said about him, and the comment he said about having that bike set up. They made a change, I think he said on Friday, and that sounds to me like they really broke through a new ceiling for him with comfort. And then lo and behold, we saw that on Saturday in the race, So, and I think there's one more point to add on Hunter. I think that fuels the fire for him getting beaten by his brother. The 2-2 score over the 3-1 and or 1-3 other way around. I reckon that fuels the fire a little bit, to be honest with you. And I think it needs to, like he's always so complimentary of his brother, but it's time for him to stand up and shine. I want to see it. I'm definitely here for it for sure.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. JT, do you ever see a future when maybe Hunter goes to a different team? It's pretty hard to envisage given the closeness of the family, and obviously BT, you can weigh on this one too, but they seem like they're all just working as a collective to get the best individual results, and it's clearly a proven formula, and I don't think they'd want to mess that up at this point, but you never know, do you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to ponder. I had heard at one point before the Chase Sexton thing came around with Kawasaki that they were pursuing Hunter at one time. I don't know if I think this may have been end of last year, last summer sometime. Cowie was just inquiring, right? Like find out if that was even a possibility, because Hunter was kind of breaking out and really showing that he could be a force to be reckoned with on a 450. And Cowie, I think they looked at Jason Anderson getting older. They had Prado coming in. I think Jason Anderson's days were numbered there, kind of regardless, unless everything that they were chasing kind of didn't come to fruition. So I don't know. It'd be like in Hunter's heart of hearts, would he want to kind of stand on his own 2 feet, or would he? Like the one thing that has to be mentioned here, and why I question it, is that Honda team is super close. Like they are truly like family, and I think he enjoys that aspect. Is there's a lot of trust underneath that tent, and they all can lean on each other. There's not it's more than just they're going to work on the weekends with each other. Like they're kind of all in this thing together. And good or bad, I don't know. That's not for me to decide. The dynamic would change if Hunter went to any other team. The dynamic would change. Like, of course it would. Like they wouldn't be able to openly discuss the motorcycle and testing. And don't forget, Hunter does a lot of the testing for Jet. Jet will dial things in on a detail level, but Hunter does a lot of the broad testing to set Jet up. Like he did almost all of the motocross testing this summer because Jet was too injured to really participate. So that throws a wrench in all those plans too. Like there's a lot of things to consider there. What would Dazzy say? No, why would we disrupt this fantastic thing we have going, this family dynamic? We really work off of each other, because if your pace, Hunter, is a little bit off, you can absorb some from Jet, and Jet really needs your input with the motorcycle, and they really feed off of each other in these unique ways to basically be their best selves, right? Like, I don't think that the average fan watching, wherever is going, yeah, Jet is really good, and a lot of this is due to Hunter being there to help him with the motorcycle when he's not sure what to do. I don't think a lot of people think that, but that is a real thing. And for Hunter being off the pace, he can, Jet is, I hear, around a second a lap quicker at the practice track every week. That's a great carrot to be dangled out there to chase every single day, because where else is Hunter going to find someone else that can beat him? Like there are very few humans on the planet that can beat him. So I don't know. You never know. This sport is funny that way, but there would have to be some long and hard conversations and some soul searching, I think, before you'd ever see that decision made.
No, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen, and for a few reasons. Number one, the dynamic there of what JT was referring to, like it's part of that program currently for that 450 program, and that's why Jet it's a big piece or big component of why Jet is being so successful. And if you speak specifically to that point around setting up the bike, they all know that. Dazzy knows that, Hunter knows that, Jet knows that, HRC, surely they know that, and that success of having Hunter as a teammate to assist in that that component is enormous for them, and the results they're getting with Jet. So no, the only way that he ever leaves there is because he's not getting the results that justify him being there, and that would have to be absurdly bad results, and then HRC would have to take a real hard think and go, if we get rid of him, are we still going to get the same Jet? And I'm telling you no, because of that whole dynamic, everything, all the components coming together there. So no, it doesn't happen.
I guess you look at Hunter Lawrence, the step he's made, that's so impressive. That should be put into sharp focus of how to step up so successfully, even though he's had injuries thrown in there. But, listen to that Gypsy Tales podcast Hunter did, and that was a really awesome insight into, the current version of Hunter Lawrence, and, how mature and disciplined and focused he is, and how he also takes things in his stride. But that they're putting in all the work to make the best athlete and to sort of just push channel at so many energies into doing that, but also having a little bit of a life outside of it as well to try and enjoy those times too, because, you know, the environment they've built for success, the compound, having the great team around them. Obviously, the agent stuff was not ideal at all happening earlier in the year, but that's sort of been talked about enough. But just really cool to see how far, you know, they've come. And you obviously were helping them out when they first moved to Europe, and he gave you some pretty cool, you know, nods of credit to that and how beneficial that was. So from you, it must be very satisfying to seeing how far he's come, not just Jet, but Hunter especially paving the way.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think probably the biggest thing that stands out there to me is just the point that he got to through that string of injuries, and I guess the decision to continue or not, you know, and how close that was to not to continue racing as a professional. It's really interesting to hear that insight. And I think that's like, I guess, sort of going off tangent slightly, but that's what's really cool about the long form podcast world these days, and being able to hear the insight into those, you know, those scenarios that athletes or anyone in that anyone for that matter, but certainly, like, you know, I listen to a lot of athlete stuff, and hearing those scenarios and where he got to, and to see now where he's at in the current form and what he's been able to do on the backside of where he was in those tough moments, I think is a real testament to him. And you know, being able to, you know, we talk about a lot about teams. You know, we're in an individual sport, but you have, you know, if we speak specifically, you know, his mum and his dad, and he works with his dad closely on a daily basis. And Johnny O is obviously, you know, and they're, you know, guiding them, mentoring them. You know, they've got a great team there with their race team as well, and the setup, like you said, with their training facility and whatnot. And so the environment they've set up for themselves. It's not just a coincidence that they're able to achieve what they're achieving, you know. But the point I was getting to, at the end of the day, you're an individual, and you have to put those results on paper every Saturday, you know, and you have to take ownership of that. And so when he was at those dark days, you know, he only one that was getting himself out of that was himself, you know. So a lot of credit to him, you know, for being able to get to where he is now as an athlete, you know, out of those dark days, for sure. Pretty cool story.
Yeah, it was great insight. He obviously said, you know, living in the Sunshine Coast in Australia, you know, if it was raining, they just say, we'll ride tomorrow. It's all sweet. Wait for it to pass. But going to Europe, like you've obviously lived it and you're finding out now your sons are, you know, there's no sort of waiting out those days. The European weather's pretty erratic and you just got to get out there. And I guess it builds tough character, all that suffering that I guess goes on both personally and in your racing as well. It certainly is pretty cool to see that that's obviously hardened him to, like, yeah, battle hardened athlete and a racer and a person. So all those experience you live through, they're probably not that fun at the time, but you come out the other side of it. One, obviously a better athlete, and two, super grateful for where you are able to be.
Yeah, and absolutely every athlete goes on their own journey, right? There's not just that one path, and especially in our sport, I guess that's what I still find fascinating about our sport, in the sense that it's man and machine, and it's a 50-50 equation in that sense, you know, from the athlete to the machine, which, you know, and generally in motorsport that's not the case, certainly, and certainly not in a lot of other sports is that the case at all, you know. So I think, you know, that's really unique in our sport, in a sense that you can buy a bike from a dealership anywhere in the world, and you know, pave your own path. And that's, I think, hearing these stories of how riders do it and what they achieve, I think it's really, really cool. That, you know, it's a great time to be alive, in that sense of hearing those stories and being able to see them, you know. Or we don't just hear them, we see them as well through the capture of, you know, film. And it's pretty cool, very cool.